Okay.
The alarm is blaring. Panic sets in. There is now a possible exposure to hazardous material. Is it chemical? A possible hydrogen cyanide spill in the lab? Biological? Maybe there's an explosion. Or like in this picture from the All Right News and Analysis, the Iraqi army discovered an ISIS stockpile of mustard gas. These are just a few examples of hazardous materials, aka hazmat incidents. Good morning, I'm Rachel Bauer. Over the past 7 years, I've had the primary objective of teaching other soldiers in the military to specialize in chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear situations. You may be wondering why you should worry about the concern for hazardous materials. It's not like many of you will find yourself in any of these situations that we just mentioned. But how many of you have seen a fuel truck accident or used a propane tank for a grill? Who used hairspray or gel this morning? Every day we use materials that pose no real threat to our immediate health. However, under the right factors, things could get deadly. So what would you do when the alarm goes off? Here's a few steps that you would consider. Awareness, process, and review. Awareness. A good technician knows to use their own senses to become more aware of the situation. Now, this doesn't mean smelling the sticky stuff. A quick look around the room can answer many questions about what the heck just happened. If the emergency response guide is nearby, grab it. It is the hazmat Bible for solving clues. These clues are referred to as indicators. One of these indicators may be a placard. There are signs that label a container to visually identify what's inside the container. You can find these on shipping crates, semi-trucks on the highway. And finding one of these can help narrow the focus of which risk is present. We all learn the three states of matter: solid, liquids, and gases. Let's say we are part of the investigation group, and you come across a suspicious substance. You can help the incident by recognizing the state of the key indicators. The Dispatcher's Guide for WMD Incident gives us some examples of potential substances. You may come upon an unusual powder, maybe white, yellowish, gray, or brown coloring. An unusual liquid, oily, usually within a brown or a yellow spectrum. If you happen to get a whiff of an unusual odor, like newly mowed grass, bitter almond, garlic, and fruity aroma, these are all signs. If it's deemed safe, you can go search for shipping papers, and my favorite, chemistry glassware. These often produce data, and recovering this data will direct us to the next step of handling a hazardous material. The process. During the process of handling a hazardous material, safety is considered the first priority. In order to ensure safety, various precautions are used. This is a Tyvek suit. This, according to DuPont Tyvek Company, its polyethylene layers barricade the body from splash hazards and dust particles. Other types of personal equipment may be necessary. Once your PPE is selected, the incident commander explains his established safety zones. If you'll refer to the middle picture, you see the hot zone where the spiked Kool-Aid is located. This is the center of the crisis. The warm zone is where the heroes in Tyvek suits scrub everyone and everything, the decon. The cold zone, this is where hazmat and medical team wait for revivals. This is going to be your clean site. The purpose is to eliminate the bad stuff as you move through the zones to the safe site. There's specific missions, and each mission requires equipment and tools. For containment, you may need just a bucket, or you may need another chemical to counteract its powerful potential. Decontamination is a huge mission. It reduces the chances of spreading the crime. be surprised to find out that warm water and soap is often the perfect solution to resolve and decontaminate many substances. The conclusion to my presentation also covers our last step to handling hazardous materials, the review. We review all of the variables and we keep them on record for future reference. The hazmat team begins to examine our evidence. First, we learn the different types of possible incidents. Then we learned to use awareness to locate our indicators. These clues answer the questions of what happened and how to respond to proceed with our mission. We can start to process the situation by knowing our required equipment. The Tyvek suit was a good example. Then we go through the hot, warm, and cold zone, making sure to effectively remove all of the contamination. And congratulations, after reviewing all of these variables, you have discovered a substance that is harmful to the health of humans, a disaccharide called sucrose, otherwise known as table sugar. You are a true hazmat hero. And that's it for my presentation. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns?
The chemistry nerd in me loved that you said your favorite type was like the chemistry meetings.
I love it. I love the air cool and the night class. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I also think it's pretty relevant, like, if you think about it, because most of us at some point are gonna have like a job, and even though like you don't think, oh, I'm not in the military, but like a lot of times whenever you're working, you use cleaning equipment, like for you, because I know at, like CVS, we have like a ton of like medication and stuff that if it spills, we have to like pour like substances on it to get it to be safe so that we can clean it up.
Oh, like even if you're on the highway, like you'll see these placards on trucks. And so that way, like you come up, if someone comes up on a semi-truck, you don't want to actually go to the semi-truck, right? You want to be able to say, oh my gosh, what is that? Because I ain't trying to get all up in that. And then, so that placard can be like, okay, I know it's based on the color, on the number, on the information. It'll help you determine, okay, how far do we need to stay, what do we need to do, all that. So.
Yeah, we do a lot
Primarily
of that in
don't
the fire department.
tailgate.
Yeah, exactly. Say again?
I said primarily don't tailgate that truck.
Especially if it has like an 8 or something.
Don't try to save gas by getting up close behind them.
Yeah, kind of like the chemicals that they use for farming and stuff. If you have like a fire out in like an agricultural area and a fire starts and they're using all these chemicals on their fields and stuff, it's flammable. And
This is new in the city.
Oh.
It is very hard, so like, yeah, so this is me teaching my classes. This is where you would decon, where you would make everything clean, so they're waiting for the infected people to come through, and they're at their different stations, and then you just scrub people up, so.
Bailey, what you were talking about there, about the fertilizers and all that kind of thing, I mean, the city of West just totally experienced the devastation out
oh yeah.
of the chemicals that are involved with fertilization.
Do you work with the fire house?
Yes, I'm the Robinson volunteer firefighter. So we do a lot, but not as much as other cities.
It's pretty cool. Kind of nerdy, a lot of science.
Yeah. It's just stuff like that you don't think about, like you just go put out a fire or something and you don't know what chemicals they've sprayed around or anything.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and get our speeches more tightly grouped because of the length of this video for upload and download purposes.
I may as well get mine over with.
I don't mean to be like funny, like for real.
Oh.
In Monsters Inc. when that sock gets on him, is that kind of like the same thing?
Like contamination?
Yeah, like.
Yeah, so how-
remember when they were on those big like yellow suits?
I like- I like
Do you remember that?
suits.
They're like stripping down. Is that basically? No. Okay.
Yeah, you're.
That's what I was thinking. That's what
She
I
keeps
saw when
on
she
saying.
said that. I was like, oh, it's like Monsters Inc. when they have the sock and all the big guys in the big yellow.
Where do you plug this in at?
Oh, you see my USB, down there sticking out?
Yeah.
Do it right on top of it.
Okay.
The left side, for some reason, works, the right side doesn't communicate, I don't know what's going on. encourage everybody not to have their head down during student presentation, to keep their eyes up and on the student. Don't be looking at your devices and working on your speech or whatever, or anything else.
Then it may be corrupt or it may not be completely in the like drive port. You should be able to go to your computer and like access all the things.
Is
that
it
are
not
there.
working? You need help?
I clicked it,
Let's see.
I think it's loaded.
Okay. No, just hit F5 and you're good.
Okay, I'll do this. I'm like so stressed.
F5.
Yeah, the top
Okay.
row
He
again.
said F5.
There you go.
Okay, so in my presentation today, I'll be discussing how, when, and where to catch fish. And if you use these, it will greatly maximize the opportunity that you have to catch fish. Most people do not know that fishing requires a lot of thought and you have to really think about what you're doing. Like, you can go out and just fish and have fun, but to really catch the fish, you have to know what you're doing. Like, you have to pick the right lure for the right occasion and go at the right time of day. We have all heard the fisherman tales. We have all heard the fishermen's tales and everything about how they lie about how big their fish is and everything. Hopefully after listening to my presentation today, you will not have to exaggerate anymore about how big the fish is. So, today I'm going to talk to you about where to fish, and I have much experience doing this. I've fished for 12 years and I've learned from people that have fished way longer than that. I learned from my grandpa that's fished for 50 years, and he learned from his dad that fished forever before that. And I've read many online articles from professional fishermen and on what they thought was best, because it's kind of different for different places in or around the United States. Like, south it's warmer, so you're going to use different types of baits and stuff than the people up north where it's colder. So, where to fish? Lake Whitney is a good spot to fish around Waco. It has a variety of shorelines ranging from limestone bluffs, rock points, to gently sloping blackland banks with various types of timber. Many consider Lake Whitney to be one of the prettiest lakes around these parts. And it is a nice lake to fish because there's many variety of fish and it is very pretty. Trading House Lake is also another good lake to fish around here. Most of Trading House's shorelines are lined with cattails and bulrushes. A variety of fishing techniques can be used here, such as spinnerbaits, worms, and jigs. The dam also makes this a great place to fish because the riprap holds a lot of fish. Lake Waco is another good place to fish around here, and it is a good place to fish because it is huge and, well, huge for around here. I say huge lightly. I mean, it's a big lake for this part of Texas. If you go to other states and stuff, you can find much bigger, but it's big for around here. It is 7,200 acres and 85 feet deep in some places, so that can hold your bigger fish. Most of the year, you can catch pretty much any type of fish out there, but during March and April, largemouth bass are abundant because coves protect them from the north wind. Another great place to fish around here is public and private ponds. this is personally my favorite because for beginners, it's the best place to start. You can do it without a boat. You don't need a boat to fish these places. Where at lakes, you're not going to be able to access the best fishing spots. Whereas ponds, you can either like buy a kayak or even fish from the bank, and you can still access all of the best places to fish. Now I'll discuss how you should fish and what lures you should use. So, topwater lures are one way to fish, and they're the best way to fish in the mornings is what I've found. Like, if you go out in the morning to fish, normally start off with the topwater. That's what I would do, and I've had great success with that. But it also depends on the weather again. So like a topwater frog, as in the left-hand picture, is great for mornings, but you can only use it in low wind conditions because of the chop on the waves. And there's two different types of topwater frogs, one being a normal or standard one, and then one of them being a popping frog, which just has a cup on the front. And you can use it in choppier water, not real choppy water, but a little choppier, because it sprays water up in front and the fish are looking up and that's what they see. So like whenever there's no wind, you can use the normal one because they can see it, but whenever there's chop on the water, it's harder for them to see, so you need the one that spits water out in front of it. And then whenever it's even too windy for that and there's a lot more chop on the water, you can use a buzzbait. That's great because the little chrome thing on it, it spins in the water and shoots up a lot of water. Soft plastics are another way to catch a lot of fish, and they're great, but color is a big deal whenever you're getting or choosing a bait of this kind, because you can choose them to be realistic colors, like as the bait fish are in that area. So like if there's you can see a lot of perch in that pond or lake, you're gonna pick a soft plastic that is that color and can imitate that bait fish very well. And it also depends a lot on water clarity, how clear the water is. Because if you're in really clear water, you're gonna wanna use a natural color that does imitate the bait fish that they eat already. And if the water's really dirty and murky and stained, you're going to want to use something that they can actually be able to see, because if you use a brown lure in brown water, they're not going to be able to see it. You want to use something brighter, like a yellow or an orange that they're going to be able to see, or maybe even a dark color, like a black, because they can see the outline of that. Another great way is crankbaits. The best places I've found to use crankbaits is around rocks, because most of them have bills on them that make them dive pretty deep. And as you can see on that one, it has a bill and it bounces off the rocks, and it does a real erratic movement when it bounces off the rocks, which triggers a reaction back from the fish. Another great bait to use around rocks and standing timber is jigs. Two things to consider when throwing a jig is water clarity and the weather conditions. So whenever, it's pretty much the same as the soft plastic. If you are fishing clearer water, you're going to want to use a natural color, and if you're fishing murkier water, you're going to want to use something more bright. But it imitates crawfish and it imitates perch. It just depends on what type you're using. Now that you know how to pick the right lure, I'm going to discuss how you need to be fishing it, or when you need to be fishing it to maximize your success. The best time of day that I found to go fishing is low light conditions, like, for example, early morning, like sunrise and sunset. The best weather to fish in is whenever there's like a change in pressure. So like if it's gonna rain, then that's a good time to fish because there's gonna be a fluctuation in pressure and light conditions, because that'll trigger them to feed more. And I got all of the info for the when to fish from takemefishing.org and Texas Parks and Wildlife. So today I first discussed where to fish. Second, I discussed the baits that you'll be using to fish. I found the baits from a professional fisherman, his website, Kevin Van Dam, one of the best in the world. And I discussed when you should go fishing to maximize your success. I hope you have learned useful tips on where, how, and when to fish. Most people do not know that fishing requires knowledge, but it does. It's a real struggle if you don't have knowledge. You can go out on days and not catch a fish because you didn't know anything. But if you do have the knowledge, it makes it a lot easier, because fishing's not fun if you're just out there fishing. I mean, if I went fishing every time and I didn't catch a fish, I'd quit. The only reason it's fun is because you're catching fish. If you're not catching fish, it ain't fun. Now that you have better knowledge of fishing, I want you to hear your fishing stories. I want to be able to teach y'all so that y'all can have fishing stories like some of mine. Thank you. I don't know how to get off here.
Let's see.
There we go.
Usually you want to disconnect your device before you just remove it from the computer, or you can corrupt your files.
That's the only thing I have here. It corrupted, I'm done now.
Y'all, I didn't take my medicine this morning, so if I have an anxiety attack, call the emergency.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, did y'all have any questions or anything? I forgot all about that. Okay.
I do have a question though. What like type of the year? It don't have to be like months or like time of the year that you like fishing. That like you find the
Summer
most
and
fish.
fall. Summer and fall would be the best, just because the size of the fish are bigger. Because they feed during the fall. During the summer, they're a lot more aggressive because of the warmer weather.
Yeah.
But during the fall, they're a lot bigger.
That's interesting you said that, because I would have thought with all the rain in the spring, the pressure would keep them acting to.
It does. I mean, it's just, they're more finicky at that time. Like, they're not gonna eat as much. Because spring or like fall, they're feeding because they know it's gonna get cold. And then winter time, they don't like to move around a lot. You actually have to go find the fish. They don't come to you.
So they're almost like bears, they'll hibernate it.
Kinda. I mean, they'll stay in place primarily in the winter time. They'll stay in one small area.
Yeah. Here we go.
Okay.
Okay. All right. This is going to be the War for Drugs by me, Justin Cook, and that is an allusion to President Nixon's war on drugs, which was initiated in the 1970s by him in order to combat a growing drug problem in the United States. So why should we be discussing this? Drugs have a major societal impact. They affect our economy, they affect our health, they affect the people around us, They affect everything that we do more than we realize. So it's an important topic. Billions are spent annually trying to combat them, and that's affecting the country in a large way. Every year, according to research done by Professor Cordova at Emory University, every year since the war on drugs was initiated, we have been spending more money on it, and we're not having much effect. And experts are unfortunately divided on the solution. Some people believe that we should be legalizing or decriminalizing drugs, and others believe that's going to make society worse rather than better. For the purposes of this speech, I'm going to be treating legalization and decriminalization as if they're the same thing. They're not. To be clear, if we were going to go more in depth on it, legalizing and decriminalizing drugs are slightly different, but this is a short presentation, so I'm going to cover them within the same spectrum. So an overview of what we're going to be discussing today. First, I want to share with you the arguments for the legalization of drugs, that is, what experts and research suggest makes it a good solution to the drug problem. Second, I want to examine the con arguments, or the people who say that's a bad idea, drugs need to stay illegal, it's going to make society far worse if we make them legal. And finally, I want to discuss some real-world examples with you, because there actually are several countries that have already done this or have done some level of this, and the United States has even gone through its own era of prohibition and then legalization with things like alcohol and currently with marijuana. So some of our pros. Legalization is cheaper and actually profitable. So if drugs were legalized, not only would we stop spending billions of dollars annually trying to combat the drug problem with little success, but we would also be making money, because then governments and pharmaceutical companies could begin selling them like they do alcohol and cigarettes. That means that we would actually be turning a profit. The war on drugs is inherently racist. No matter whether you're for or against legalization of drugs, it's hard to get around the fact that many experts agree that it was initiated for the purpose of targeting people of color, minority communities. And the Drug Policy Alliance has done a significant amount of research showing that Caucasian Americans, that is, white people, do drugs more frequently at a higher rate than people of color, yet African Americans and Latino Americans are the highest incarcerations for most drug use. Most of them just for possession. Up to 42% of people are put into jail for not using drugs, not selling drugs, just because they were caught with drugs on them. And between 2012 and 2013, that same organization, the Drug Policy Alliance, found that 13,000 people were deported simply for being caught with marijuana. Drug users are imprisoned alongside other more dangerous criminals. So much research suggests that the majority of our prisons right now are filled with drug users. That's a problem, and that's a problem because prisons should be utilized for people who are rapists and murderers and more significant types of criminals, and we're not really segregating them. So when we put them in jail, we're saying, oh, you had marijuana, here's a cell with somebody who killed 13 people. Here you go. You know, that's kind of an issue, not really the same level of crime, and a lot of times the maximum sentence is given for drug use. It's ridiculous. Public health versus a legal matter. So this is a highly contentious topic. There are many experts, particularly health experts, who believe that we should be treating the drug issue in the country as a matter of public health, not as a criminal law issue. Because addiction is a disease. That is an actual defined disease. That's not a legal thing. So what we should be doing is treating addiction, not imprisoning people who are suffering. And there are rehabilitation programs for that exact thing. So those are just some of the key points to why we should be legalizing drugs. I can go a little bit more in depth on them in a moment, but some of our cons. So increased crime rates and a weaker economy. So if you're against the legalization of drugs, you might argue that there are significant studies that tie the use of drugs to higher crime rates, and you would be correct about that. In communities where drug use is more prevalent, there's also higher rates of other violent crimes, such as rape and murder, and oftentimes criminals who are in prison for one have background in another. Then we may experience a weakening economy from this, because if people are committing higher crimes, then property values go down. So think about it like this. If you have a community that is currently fairly drug-free, fairly crime-free, then property values are high within that community. But if you introduce drugs in a legal way, there's no getting around the fact that more people will purchase legal drugs. If that increases crime rates within good communities, then property values decrease, and that means the economy can be weakened as a result, so we may actually lose money. It can also increase family dysfunction and broken homes. There's a significant amount of research that correlates drug use to divorce, spousal abuse, early death. All of these things impact the home life, the family. And that means that we're potentially raising a broken generation of children under parents who are more drug addicted than before, or people who have early death. drugs are not a good thing on the body. There's also a higher risk of disease. So the CDC has done a lot of research on organ failures via drug use. We already know that alcohol's bad for your kidney and liver. You know, that's easy enough. Most other drugs are terrible for you as well, and I'm not just talking about the way they can cause AIDS, because drugs such as heroin and other intravenous substances can increase the spread of AIDS. But pretty much every drug can lead to significant organ failure or other diseases. So if we increase our use of drugs, we may be increasing early death in the country via increasing disease. These are also likely to target lower class communities. So if we're targeting lower class communities, again, back to alcohol and cigarettes, they're currently legal. Who is the highest purchaser of alcohol and cigarettes? Typically, it's your lower class. That means the people who are already poor and already struggling are spending more of their money on alcohol and cigarettes that they can't afford, because advertisements and marketing specifically targets them. This goes back to what we said just a moment ago with the public health versus the legal matter. Most people abuse drugs because they're suffering, because they're struggling, because their life isn't that great at the moment, and that's what typically starts drug use. So that's going to be your lower class, the people who have the hardest time in society. That means that if we legalize other drugs, say heroin, meth, cocaine, these very serious, very damaging drugs, if we made them legal, who are they going to target for a profit? The same community that's already being targeted by alcohol and cigarettes. That means that we're potentially condemning an already struggling group of citizens. Just for a moment, I want to go back to the war on drugs and racism, because this is going to tie back to my disease discussion just for a moment. Because it's not just racist. The war on drugs has also been used to target other minority communities, including the LGBTQ+ community. Drugs have a significant history of spreading disease, including HIV and AIDS. Back before we understood that the use of drugs was a major contributor to the spread of HIV and AIDS, it was largely passed off on gay men. That means that it was used as fear-mongering, not only to make people afraid of African Americans and Latinos, because everyone thought, oh, they're the ones abusing drugs, but also to make people afraid of homosexual individuals because everyone looked at them as diseased. Worldview. So foreign nations have had mixed results with this. We've had several nations such as Portugal that have already decided to implement these programs. Instead of spending their billions of dollars on trying to imprison everyone for drug use, they've instead been spending their money on rehabilitation programs. So if they catch you with drugs, you may go to court if you possess a certain amount, but typically the sentence is actually just a rehabilitation program. So instead of going to jail, you get put in this little program where they basically cleanse your system. And they've had great success. Drug rates have been decreasing, crime rates have been decreasing. However, a little bit of a con to this, these rates were already on the decline before the program started. So people who are on the opposing side of this say those studies are a little inaccurate because the rates were already decreasing before we ever actually started this program. So the program may not be the reason for it. Additionally, people say that Portugal doesn't have as much of a drug problem as the United States, and they would be right about that. It's a much smaller country with fewer citizens to control. The drug rate wasn't as high there as it is in the US, and it's cheaper to implement a solution than it is here. It may not be as effective. Our country has also done this before with alcohol. So back in the 1920s, you all know what prohibition is. We made alcohol illegal, and what was the result? Increasing crime rates. Because people wanted alcohol. So citizens started rioting, they started having these underground speakeasies where they could go and they could drink and they could get away with anything that they could as far as getting alcohol. Everyone wants to drink. So the government eventually said, you know what, it's better that we regulate this than just let you guys continue doing what you're doing right now. So we're just gonna make it legal again. We're gonna repeal that 18th Amendment, made it illegal, the 21st repealed it. So the government repealed it, and ever since then we've had decreased crime rates regarding alcohol. However, that doesn't necessarily say that we're gonna have the exact same results with other drugs. So we have a couple of studies on marijuana right now, because we're going through another era of prohibition, specifically with marijuana. We're nowhere near the point of decriminalizing other drugs. This speech is about everything, but to be clear, the only thing we really have currently going on is marijuana. I don't think anyone in the White House is currently advocating for selling heroin at CVS. That would stress me out, by the way. But with marijuana, so there's a couple of studies that are suggesting that even though it's good for medical use and there's a lot of benefits to having it and we're making money off of it and it's regulated, so we have a lot less people going to jail for it, there are also studies that, ever since it's been legalized, suggest that marijuana-related deaths and accidents have significantly increased in those states because people don't use drugs responsibly, if that's even a thing, and they smoke while they're driving or while they're taking care of children, and even though marijuana is supposedly not that, what is the word I'm looking for, inhibiting to your system, it has increased the number of accidents, deaths, and other reported incidents. So we have to be careful with this. So in review, we discussed some of the pro arguments for legalizing drugs. We can go back to that for just a moment. We can say that it was cheaper and it may be profitable for us to legalize drugs. We can turn around and make profit off of it instead of spending billions trying to combat it and failing. It's inherently racist. It targets minority communities, specifically people of color like African Americans and Latino communities. It also targets minority communities like the LGBTQ+. Drug users are imprisoned alongside other more dangerous criminals, and people believe it should be treated as a public health matter instead of a matter of law. Then we discuss some of our con arguments, such as increased crime rates, which may weaken the economy, family dysfunction in broken homes, which could significantly impact the next generation of kids growing up. There's a higher risk of disease, organ failure, and early death. And it's going to target lower class citizens, aka the people in our society who need the most help. Finally, we reviewed some real world examples, such as foreign nations like Portugal that have already implemented these programs and had mixed results, mostly successful. And then our country that has done this before. In conclusion, drugs, as we said at the beginning, have a major societal impact. There are supporting arguments for both sides, and as a society, we should always be striving to improve our health, our economy, the world around us. We need to be doing our best to make our country as great as we can, because we have to live with it. Staying informed on this topic is vital. Our personal decisions not only affect our life, but they affect everyone else's life as well. Not just in the sense that you may decide, oh, I'm not going to use drugs, therefore I'm taking care of my kids, or oh, I think drugs should be legalized because you can use them in a responsible way, or we can help people who have drug addictions. But you have to stop and think for a moment that there are going to be politicians that in the future are probably going to push for this. One way or the other, we're going to have politicians that are going to start pushing for or against the legalization of drugs, and eventually marijuana is not going to be the only topic up for debate. It may be 10 or 20 years down the line, but we're eventually going to have people that stand up and say, I think we should be decriminalizing all these substances, and other people who say that's ridiculous. And we have to decide where we stand on it, and having all of the information is vital. Because each of us is going to make our own decision, but we're also each going to cast our own vote, which means our own individual decision could impact the life of everyone around us. Thank you. Yeah, I thought I was going to do better than that. That was rough. I should have just done a how-to video. That would have been much simpler than that. I was so stressed out. Oh, I forgot to establish why I'm credible for this. So I gave a debate in high school over this exact topic. It's fascinated me since I was like in early high school. So whenever I was a junior in high school, I put together like a whole giant portfolio over this and stood up in front of like an audience of people, and we did like a back and forth. Like I had to argue like the for side, and then I had to flip and argue the against side of it. So this was a very condensed, short and rushed version of that because, like I said, I had a giant portfolio to do that with back then. So I kind of had to push it together and do it really quickly. But